So, ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to start with our first plenary. And in this plenary, various distinguished speakers will provide their view on the central theme of our conference, the life cycle approach in HTAi, and from different perspectives. So the patient, clinical, HTAi bodies, industry, etc. The plenary will be moderated by my dear friend and colleague, Ulrich Rüther. Ulrich, I think, hardly needs introduction. Many of you will remember him as one of the co-chairs of the very successful HTAi annual meeting in Cologne in 2019. At a time when we thought we were still controlling viruses rather than the other way around. Ulrich is a medical doctor by training and head of the International Affairs Unit at IQWiG, the German Institute for Quality and Efficiency in Healthcare. He established the HTAi section at DIMDI. He was vice chair of INATA, and he is lecturer in HTAi at the University of Bielefeld in Germany. He is, one could say, Mr. HTAi International. Ulrich, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mr. International HTAi, that's so great. Thank you, and good morning to everybody, friends of HTAi. It's really a pleasure to see you all here and to see so many people in person, and also knowing to have also friends outside. I'm very happy to have a very good panel here. But I think we want to do something else, what you might expect. We do not want to present solutions. We do not give you solutions to life cycle approach and how can we adapt it and how can we do it. We just want to lead you a little bit into the conference, to give you the impulse and the thoughts, what's going on here and what we can do. We have different people here talking about their idea, their need and their challenge for a life cycle approach of HTAi. If you say, it might be everything already, we have this very nice definition shortly made by good colleagues for HTAi, where they said HTAi is a multidisciplinary process that uses explicit methods to determine the value of a health technology at different points in its life cycle. So it's already done, because it's in the definition. But is that true? Is life cycle really already there? Or are there just some silos, one after the other? Is it connecting, as we said in the beginning, and it is also written in the program, connecting all stakeholders? Do we collaborate? Do we exchange? Do we have innovation? And I really like Professor Levy's word, we are going to a sensible innovation. Are we doing sensible HTAi with life cycle approach? I don't know. So let's see and let's interact. So this is a collaborating thing, that's an HTAi thing. So we start first with our electronic mean. I think everybody of you have this app. I hope everybody have the app, because we of course interact here. We just do not want to be here alone in front. And there is a possibility to make a poll. And I hope the poll question is already there, which we want to start with a poll. It's a kind of a cloud poll. So you have to type in words, and we will see, and you also can like words, and then we can see what will be the most liked for this. And the question which we want to give you, I do not see it here, but is there already some electronic? Yeah. Now it's on, it's live. What are the key elements for a life cycle approach in HTAi? What do you think? Go for it. In the meanwhile, I'm going to explain a little bit of this plenary. The plenary is in two parts. The first will be that we have three pitches here. pitches by two. They debating on life cycle approach in HTAi. There we have different members of the HTAi circle from patient advocate over clinician, industry, and also HTAi people, which will talk together. So you get what they have for difficulties or see for challenges in this life cycle. Thereafter, we sit together and we will discuss about this, and we need you. So please, there is also the possibility in this very nice app to give questions. We are here in a theater. That's why we do not have microphones somewhere where you can step up, because it would be really difficult to walk through these lines all the time. So please use the electronic device to give us the questions and your thoughts, which we can discuss here. And there's also something else. As you see on this side, we have a graphic recording. So this is here, Thea is sitting here. This is our very good expert, and a very warm welcome to Thea, because I know she will do a great job, because it is extremely difficult to get to transfer simultaneously what we are discussing here into a graph, into a picture, which should facilitate what we are saying and facilitate for you the content of this meeting here. Okay, so far, I would love to see, before we start with the first pitch, I would like to see is there the poll already? Is there something already we can see for the poll? So I do not see anything at the moment. Now it comes on the app. And I do not know whether it's seen on the screen, but I see here what I can tell you. I expect that. It is collaboration is the biggest word. And then we have reassessment, and then in the same size it is RVD, okay. It is patients, it is evidence, it is data, and resources. Very nice. We will see how it is going to develop. Good. So I will step here, step aside. Is this microphone on now? So we are going to the first provoking pitch, which will academia versus developing industry. So I would like to ask Markus Siebert and Janneke Grötters into the pitches fighting stump here. First will be Janneke Grötters. She is an associate professor.
Markus is first.
Yes, I know, but I introduce you first.
Sorry.
Ladies first. Associate professor at the Department of Health Evidence and Operating Rooms in the Radboud University Medical Center here. He has a big expertise of HTAi, especially in the very early stage of the development. And Markus Siebert is the Senior Director, Reimbursement and Healthcare Economics at the International Division as Abbott. He is responsible for the development and execution of reimbursement strategies and for guiding the development of health economic evidence in support of market access for Abbott's medical device innovation. So we have now somebody of medical devices and not always pharmaceuticals. That I'm very happy to discuss this, because this might be quite tricky. Yeah? He holds a master's degree in economics and one in health economics, and is a member of the MedTech Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alrik. It's a pleasure to be here. Very distinguished panel. I am humbled to be part of that. So as Alrik said, I'm representing Abbott, and I'm representing Abbott's device business, and that's already an important disclaimer to make, because obviously everything I'm going to say about technology assessment and how we interact with it obviously has this bias of devices, and also the part of devices that Abbott stands for, which is more on the invasive side of things. So we are in the cardiac care, we are in neurology, but we're really talking about implants, we're talking about quite sophisticated procedures that we support. So we need to bear that in mind. So I wanna leave Janneke with 4 thoughts that she will then resolve for us. The first one, I was wondering, and we heard about this morning from the representative from the ministry, about replacing cost effectiveness with value. I think that's the way she put it. And I was thinking about value, and I was wondering, why is it that everyone likes value-based healthcare, and why is it so hard to implement it? And I think there are 2 reasons for that. One has to do with the fact that value is a very subjective thing to all of us, to all of the players in healthcare, and it comes in many disguises. And what might be valuable for me might not necessarily be valuable for somebody else. And when you, for instance, think, in our space, when we develop, a technology that shortens, if you wish, patients' length of stay in a hospital, that might obviously be very valuable for the patient. But is it valuable for the hospital? I think that depends on how the hospital is actually financed and whether they are encouraged to obviously have a shortest possible stay of the patient, or whether they are more funded by more itemized care. So. And that brings me to the second point. It's not only the disguise of value and what value means to an individual, but I think the most important point why value-based healthcare is so difficult to implement has to do with the funding and the financing incentives. So there is clearly a disconnect between what is value and value for somebody in the healthcare system, and who ultimately pays and who ultimately makes that purchasing decision. And that disconnect is something that we weren't able yet to overcome. And so that's my first question, suggestion, ask to the HTAi community, can you help? The second one has also to do with value, and has to do with how value is generated, particularly also in the medtech space. And Professor Levy has actually brought a beautiful example from the world of the TAVI valves, and there are many others. And the one that I wanted to share is from the if you think of pacemakers, and the first pacemaker was introduced in 1958, and it weighed almost 200 grams, and it had an external battery that needed to be charged once a week for 12 hours. And today's pacemakers weigh 23 grams, and their battery lasts for 10 to 12 years. And in between, all these years, there was every probably 18 to 24 months, there was something new that came to the world of pacemakers. So we were adding, new chambers that could be paced. We were adding better sensing algorithms. We were adding MRI compatibility, remote monitoring, remote programming, all these things. So that means that we are adding value over time. And so that brings us to the question, when are you actually assessing such a technology as pacing or as valve replacement? When is the technology mature enough? On the one hand, you want to assess it as early as you can from a probably payer perspective, because you would like to understand, is this worth my while? Should I invest in this? What's the implication? What's the budget impact? But what's the sense of assessing something which isn't fully matured yet, which has so much more promise to come in the future, right? And for instance, that could be an example for lifecycle approach. Is lifecycle approach an answer to that? But then bear in mind, how long does it take to actually complete a traditional HTAi process? And once it is done, will you already be confronted with a new generation of your technology? So are you almost in a perpetual cycle of assessing technologies, and could that really be the solution? And then final thought, and I have 13 seconds left for that, has to do with particularly also when you think of the implant world that Abbott represents. Many of the devices that we have are kind of front-loaded when it comes to their costs. So today you make an investment decision, you implant a rather pricey device in a complex procedure. So there's a lot of payment that needs to happen now, and the promise, the delivery, the value comes over 10, 15 years down the road. So how do you actually factor this into your, again, purchasing and allocation decision? So another example, another question to HTAi. So I'm wondering, with all these challenges that are still out there, can HTAi 2.0 be a solution? Can HTAi become more of a partner, more of a steward for us than a gatekeeper? Janneke, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I know that Ulrich wanted a debate today, but I'm afraid that we agree too much for that. I like the idea of HTAi as a steward or maybe a coach instead of a gatekeeper. And I think that's the solution for the life cycle approach and for the problems you've just set out. And I do believe that HTAi has what it takes to do that already. We have the methodology available. We just need to use them differently. And I'll give you 5 elements that I think should be different for using it more as a steward than as a gatekeeper that are important. And you asked the question, when should we do the assessment? When is it mature enough? And I'm convinced that you have to start really early. If you really want to adopt a life cycle approach to HTAi, you have to start very early, maybe even before you are developing the innovation, maybe even if you have the idea, then already involve HTAi and see where's the value. Is there a problem? Like Professor Levy said, is this a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, or is this a real problem that's experienced by the stakeholders? And is this something that people are waiting for? And I think for that to work, we need to do it differently. So we don't need to predict, for example, cost effectiveness or effectiveness, like we are used to do, but we need to use HTAi methods in a more exploratory way, exploring how can it have value. How can we maximize the value? Where in the pathway is there a need for this technology? I think it's also important to be participatory instead of basing it on expert authority. So involve stakeholders early on. Like I said, is there a problem? Do they experience a problem? And also, what is value? What do they see as the value of this technology, the potential value, and how can we measure that? What is needed to prove that value then? Third point is that it should be iterative. Professor Levy also touched upon that. Continuous evaluation, you also said it's changing all the time. We need to do iterative assessments. We need to start early and keep assessing the technologies while they are changing, while they are implemented in healthcare, while they are being developed. And related to that is that it should be flexible and adaptive. Like you said, we cannot do very comprehensive assessments that we're used to because innovation is evolving so rapidly. We need to be nimble and we need to be flexible and adaptive in a sense that if something's changing, we're already anticipating on that change. So we know that there might be that, for example, TAVI, we probably could have thought that it could be used in different populations, and we could have thought about that early on. And what if that happens? How effective should it be? When does it have value? When do we think it has sufficient value? And then finally, I think we should be more transparent, but because we already do these kinds of assessments early on of innovations, and I think we've proven as an academic society, but also in industry, that we can do this. But it's often, those assessments are often internal and confidential, and I think in that way we cannot really learn from each other, and we cannot improve the methodology, and we cannot mature that early assessment or early evaluation of innovation. So I think we should be more open about the assessments and share experiences, learn from each other, and that way I think HTAi can have much more impact than it has now, because we can really improve the value of innovations instead of just gatekeeping and saying yes or no.
Thank you so much. Incredible. Exactly 10 minutes.
Yeah.
This is HTAi, I must say. This is science. Wow. I'm really impressed. So thank you so much. This was the first pitch. Let's be steward, coach of HTAi. Let's see what happened. So, thank you. So we go to the second provoking positions. This is established HTAi organization versus healthcare provider. It's Susan Miles and Job Danum. And I have to say, unfortunately, this morning we got the notice that Susan Miles is ill and cannot come. So I hope she can at least have a look at this here, and that we miss her, and that we wish all the very best to her. But I will try to be Susan here for a second. So, sorry, Susan. And so this is not, I've not the hat of IQWIC now, I take the other hat and will try to give some points here. I'm accompanied by Job Danum. Job Danum is a medical specialist in internal medicine, Department of Internal Medicine, Radboud University in Nijmegen. He heads the Hypertension Excellence Center at this institution and focuses his research on diagnosis and treatment of hypertension. He heads the training program for fellows in vascular medicine and is one of the chairs of the Medical Ethical Institutional Review Board. He lives with his cat in a small village near Nijmegen. It's a black cat, he told me.
Can I have my slides? I'm not Susan Miles. Yeah. So I'm a clinician, and I was asked to present a case which is typical for the questions that we face as clinicians in the light of Lifecycle HTAi. But the first question a clinician will ask is, what is Lifecycle HTAi? Because we are not knowledgeable at all in these terms. And I'm going to explain to you what the problems are for us. So I'm an internist, and I'm mainly involved with hypertension, especially difficult to treat hypertension. I'm in an academic institution, so I get tertiary referrals. And the main issues in this type of hypertension are non-adherence of patients to their regimens and underdiagnosed underlying disease, which we call secondary hypertension. And this is mainly located in the adrenals. But I'm going to talk about renal denervation. And renal denervation is a technique where we destroy sympathetic nerves in the renal artery. You can see on the left-hand side the aorta, the large artery, with the renal artery and the kidney. And in the wall of this artery, there are fibers of the sympathetic nervous system, part of the autonomous nervous system. And they are running to and from the kidney, and they play an important role, at least that's what we think, in blood pressure homeostasis. And so if you have a patient who has high blood pressure and you destroy these fibers, then the idea is that the blood pressure will be lowered. And you can see from the lower part that the number of publications has increased starting from 1935, so it's a very old idea. But the technology was not there, but there came a technology available in the early 2000s, and then a lot of studies were done with very bad designs generally by the industry in the wrong kinds of patients with immature technology perhaps, until 2014 when a randomized trial was published that was negative for the effect of renal denervation. But because these designs were so bad, better technology was developed, and also to get, I think, better return on investment, better study populations, and now there seems to be really an effect. As you can see in a very recent publication over a 3 years' time, blood pressure is more lowered by renal denervation than by the usual strategy of prescribing drugs. It's a very attractive concept, but it has a few problems. It's expensive, it's invasive, it's destructive. We think it is safe on the long run, but we're not sure yet. It's promoted, very much promoted by profit-driven companies. and procedures-driven interventionists, but does it work in my patient? That's something that I cannot answer yet. Will my patients accept this kind of treatment? Will it be sustainable in terms of money, and would it compete with the valuable care that we have? Because the drugs that we prescribe to patients are cheap and they are extremely effective if they are taken, but they are often not taken, so would it be a solution for this kind of patients? And in order to urge them to take the drugs, we need to talk to them a lot, which is very expensive because we are very expensive. And it's very unclear what if interventions are effective to enthuse these patients to take the drugs better than they do now. So there are many problems with both of these strategies. And what my question as an innocent and naive clinician is how could Lifecycle HTAi inform me? And would these people also be interested in what my patients think of such a procedure? And can they help me to identify those patients that will benefit most? Because not everyone benefits from this technology. And are they interested in issues of justice? Because if we will spend our money on this very expensive technique, we will not be able to spend it on other interventions that we have. And where can I find these people? Because we in the hospital, we never see these people. They do not come to our wards, but we don't reach out to them as well. How could we improve that? So this is what my questions are on this.
Thank you, Jaap. Well, I must say, we in Wales, we established already a life cycle approach, I must say. We want to provide a strategic and streamlined and nationally coordinated approach for the identification, appraisal, and adoption of medical technologies across Wales. So, medical technologies, this is not, again, not drugs, but well, and we are very experienced here, because we have a lot of processes exactly to integrate also people. We have the innovative device access pathway. We have a lot of national innovation programs, topic exploration reports, and everything also to inform and get the information. We have use horizon scanning, and we do the early dialogue also through this innovative device access pathway. Yeah, we make a gap analysis together with NICE and the meta tool, so to integrate also these people and the detailed advice and method support. And we're going through the life cycle. This is not just the early, it's also the post-assessment. Yeah? This is the idea, adopt or justify. So justify the process, the device. There's adoption infrastructure, guidance tracking software. So this might be also something for you as a clinician. They will have a SOP for reassessment with a clear, strict points, a 3-year review of all the assessments, evidence reassessment, national guidance access, and all this stuff. So there's a lot of things where we try to get into contact and we try to get the information. But I come to this back later because this is a tricky question. But on the other hand, what are the opportunities we see with the life cycle approach in Wales? First, to go to the HTAi processes. It is the opportunity to re-engineer processes. So this is a vivid thing, more dynamic and temporal. The HTAi methods, yeah, there is the opportunity to be more responsive. Is there a need, an idea of tailored methods? Big discussion, whether this is good or not. Better explicate and explain the uncertainty. This is also something which is continuously done. Yeah? HTAi contribution means extends contribution in HTAi or improve HTAi policy user engagement. So this is the decision maker. You are the decision maker in the hospital, but there are also other decision makers around which we have to address, understandable, which is very difficult or mostly. What are the challenges we see with the life cycle approach? Again, let's go to the processes. It is extremely resource intensive. What we learned this morning from Professor Levy, they say that the innovation, it goes up. We let a lot of data, a lot of information we have to deal with all the time, and we need all this experience and experienced people. But even if we try to get international collaboration, I think we will come to this in the discussion, we do not have the experts. So what shall we do? It's an ongoing attention and collaboration. And for the methods to deal with that, we need to evolve and extend methods, extended skill sets. What is an HTAi start? What is stop? What do we need to assess at which time? Yeah? And maintaining science and credibility of HTAi and the early decision with less certain evidence is really a challenge. So these are the points which we see in Wales here, and we are very much going forward to work on that. But I found it very interesting in your talk that you said talking to patients is expensive.
Yes.
So
Well, it's essential to talk to patients, but it takes a lot of time, and time is money, of course. And I like talking to patients a lot, but I know that my boss would be pleased if I could have things that do not cost that much of my time. For instance, if this renal denervation is a success, then it would obviate the need for drugs. That's the idea. It doesn't, because it only spares one drug, and most of these patients need 3 or 4 drugs. But it is expected to be an intervention that whose effects will last forever, and so I will not be needing to talk to these patients anymore after that, which is cheap, of course. It's a sort of cynical view, but that's the way it is thought about, is my feeling.
So I learned the most important thing what you're asking from us HTAi people is time. So we can provide you with time, of course, because we can provide you with really the evidence which you can have in doing evidence-based medicine. Yeah, that's that should be our task. And you also asked where are the HTAi people? Well, I'm here beside you, of course, and they are there. Yes. And I would really recommend to contact the HTAi people who are already doing and trying to adopt the life cycle in the hospitals. Yeah, Barcelona is a great city. Go there because they're doing a great job there. So you have nice Catalanian surrounding and the HTAi information, which you get here from our audience, for example. So we are there, and we love to come to you into your hospital.
Yes, that's true. But why is it then that, for instance, if I would ask my colleagues from my department what Lifecycle HTAi is, that no one has a clue, and how can we improve that? I'm extremely fond of HTAi people, and I think my opinion is that HTAi department should be within a hospital, at least in our hospital, and that any decision that you would take on innovation would be discussed with HTAi departments. But that's not a reality as far as I have experienced so far.
So let us discuss that later, this open pitch, and let's go to this next one. Thank you so much. So for the last pitch, it's HTAi on the run, HTAi Malaysia versus the patient representative. And I ask Izuna Ghazali and Pauline Evers here. Izuna Ghazali is the Deputy Director of the Medical Development Division and Head of the Malaysian Health Technology Assessment Section, MATAS. This is the HTAi agency in Malaysia. Izuna is a public health physician and has been with MATAS since 15 years. Other than HTAi, her experience includes setting up horizon scanning systems for Malaysia and development and implementation of clinical practice guidelines. Very good connection. She is currently the chair of the ISPRA HTAi Roundtable Asia Pacific, the vice president of HTAi Asia Link, and the regional coordinator for Asia Scan of International Health Tech Scan. Her opponent is Pauline Evers. Pauline Evers is a patient advocate for the Dutch Federation of Cancer Patient Federations in the area of access to innovative treatments, and as such, she is involved in reimbursement decisions in the Netherlands. She also is one of the 3 patient representatives in the Committee of Orphan Medicinal Products at the European Medicine Agency. Pauline, Izuna, the floor is yours.
Yes. Well, I'm going to start, and first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee that patient representatives are also involved in these plenary discussions. because as Marcel Levy already said, everyone always says we have the patient in the center of our ideas, the development of our products, the way we are dealing with health issues. But then we should make sure that patients are really there. So it's an honor to me to be here. Each new therapy leads to improvement, which leads to improvement of symptoms of disease or even cure, and or to better quality of life, offers hope to patients. But the hope only transforms into reality when an intervention really works in an individual, that's one, and whether it becomes available, meaning that it's accessible and reimbursed for patients. And these are the two cornerstones, I think, of HTAi and reimbursement decisions. Too often, HTAi is being seen only as dealing with costs. A black and white decision taken at a certain moment of the introduction of new technologies in daily care. And because there is still much uncertainty sometimes about the real value of new interventions, HTAi discussions might lead to delay or even cancellation of reimbursement for all patients. And for patients, this is very difficult to understand. Why, if something has approval from regulatory agencies or is incorporated in guidelines by physicians, HTAi is readdressing the evidence and looking for value of the product. There is already value, so why are we not getting it? On the other hand, there is, of course, the value for the society as a whole, and patients are part of that. We can spend our money only once, so there is a dilemma between the value for the individual patient and the value for the society. And because of this difficult decision, I think it should not be taken at one certain time point, but it should be constantly adapted and evaluated. And that is, to my idea, what we understand, what we mean by life cycle management. Also, when you look at the introduction of a new intervention, this is mostly based on clinical trial results, which is a limited population, mostly selected patients. And so it will not answer the question from the patient when he is discussing treatment with his physician on what is in it for me. So that is also an important thing which might be discussed by HTAi over the life cycle of a product. In the whole process of this life cycle management, patients should be involved in the discussion. They know the burden of the disease and they know the burden of the treatment. And actually, I liked what Janneke was saying somewhere in her statements, that patients should be, that we should look at what the real value of an intervention can be at a very early stage of development. So you should ask patients at that very early stage already, what is your disease? How is your disease affecting your life? And what are the most important issues which you would like to have addressed by this treatment? And what are the challenges? Being a cancer patient advocate, I will focus on cancer. In other disease areas, there will be many other issues. In general, for life cycle management, you need real-world data. And I have not heard that word already in the discussion today, but real-world data are very important, and they are actually very difficult to get. Of course, there is a huge amount of data all around the place, starting with the patient health records in the hospitals, but how to extract evidence from those data to really support decisions. I think that's a very difficult issue which we need to work on. And in cancer particularly, there is the speed of innovation, and I would like to come back to what was said before on the pacemaker topic, where you see that the device is evaluating over time. So the value at, let's say, the start of the introduction is quite different from what it will be after 5 years from now. And if you look at the cancer area, where at least in some of the indications, there are so many medicines coming shortly after each other, and that it's, by the time you will have the real-world evidence collected, the medicine would already be outdated. So those are my questions, actually, also to Izuna. So how can we cover the speed, how can we involve patients, and how can we close the gap between the regulatory and the HTAi?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning. Thank you, HTAi, for the opportunity. Thank you for having me today, and thank you, Pauline, for the discussion just now. I will start off by explaining our work at MAHTAS, Malaysian Health Technology Assessment Session, which is the HTAi agency in Malaysia. So Malaysia is one of the earliest countries in Asia to establish HTAi, which is in 1995. Our remit includes all types of health technologies, from pharmaceuticals, devices, diagnostics, procedures, and also public health interventions. And in the initial stage, HTAi was the only product that we produced. In 2001, the clinical practice guideline was put under our purview to ensure evidence-based process in developing the clinical practice guidelines and also to align clinical practice guidelines recommendation with HTAi. So in 2007, we started to develop strategies for CPG implementation to increase the uptake of CPGs. Since 2015, we started horizon scanning as a pilot project. Initially, the system identified technology which are expected to be marketed within 24 months. However, now the scope has been expanded to facilitate industry involved in health innovation since early development of technologies to accelerate the development of high-value health innovations and accelerate access of proven technologies. Let me address the 4 issues that has been pointed by Pauline just now. Next slide, please. Oops. Okay. So the first is regarding HTAi should not be a gatekeeper but a steward working towards optimizing treatment. As someone from HTAi agency, I can say that the aim of many HTAi agencies is to improve patient care as well as the population health. The life cycle approach gives the advantage of identifying technologies for certain diseases which are at various stages of the life cycle, which means that if you want to treat, you want to develop guidance on hypertension, so we will look at the technologies which are at various stages in the life cycle. So this approach allows the policymakers and the stakeholders to have a widened horizon on the available technologies which are upcoming and technologies which are going to be obsolete or replaced. With such perspective, selection of the best treatment option can be done in a more transparent and a more systematic approach. Planning for procurement, training, capacity building, or other related resources, including reimbursement mechanism, can be planned early so that access can be accelerated. Yeah. And broad scope of technologies being assessed, which include pharmaceuticals, devices, diagnostics, procedures, and public health interventions, allow the government or the policymakers to prioritize which technologies to be invested in. For what purpose? For example, if you want to eliminate certain disease, whether you want to focus on prevention, screening, diagnostic, curative, or rehabilitative. So this will actually help to reduce the burden of the disease and also eliminate certain diseases. So clinical practice guidelines, which are in line with HTAi recommendation, will optimize patient treatment, reduce variation of care, and also improve patient outcome. The second point is in terms of the value, in terms of reimbursement. So the life cycle approach may also means that there is continuous evaluation or reassessment of technologies being conducted. So this approach means that reimbursement decision can be revisited when more evidence becomes available. So the decision for reimbursement is not a one-off. It can be a dynamic decision depending on the available evidence. The real-world evidence is being used by many HTAi agencies nowadays. It is used in economic evaluation and may support evidence on effectiveness and also safety. For example, when we conduct reassessment, the post-marketing surveillance data is very important, especially in terms of if there are safety issues. In Malaysia, usually this is being collected by our regulators, so we make use of this data to evaluate whether there are really safety issues in the treatment, in the medications or the medical devices. And also, example, during COVID-19, most of the treatment, the diagnostic approach are being introduced early when evidence is not, usually we say that is adequate for HTAi, so introduced early, so real-world evidence is very important to support the decision so that the decision can be revisited later if there are issues in terms of safety or treatment, then it's not that effective that we found out later. Patient input. As many government moves towards value-based medicine, involvement of patients and other relevant stakeholders is very important. And when we conduct health technology assessment, the group that will be affected the most is the patients. So patient input throughout the life cycle of the technologies can be very meaningful. In the beginning of the technology development, the patients can provide their input in terms of whether this technology is actually sensible in terms of the patient's perspective. Yeah? And throughout the life cycle, whether the technology is actually, what are the expected, the acceptance, and also other issues. So other than patients, clinicians plays an important role. For us, in Malaysia, what we practice is that for every topics that we receive for assessment, we will discuss with the national head of service of the clinical disciplines to ensure that what are the treatment gaps that need to be looked at, and what is the current treatment gap, and also what is the purpose of the assessment of this technology, and whether clinically they think that this is something viable before we start the assessment. So, the involvement of various stakeholders, including patients, clinicians, public health experts, and the multifaceted of values being assessed in HTAi makes it a comprehensive assessment for betterment of the patients and also the society. With that, I thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, this was the provoking pitches series to let your brains starting though early in the morning, and I hope everybody is now running very hot. And I really recommend to use the app for providing questions. There are already some. And also I want to say again, have a look at the graph to get the pitches a little bit back in mind, that you can just have some questions on it. I'm quite impressed by these kind of discussions from all of you, and I said this is really going on, but I do not see anybody who said, oh, life cycle approach would be a nonsense. That's interesting. So we are almost on a line that we say, life cycle approach is something good, but I'm not sure whether everybody really understands the same on life cycle approach and what you do with life cycle approach. So my first question would be, after all that, what would be the first step you think we should do now to get a better understanding or get something going on? What do you think? Who wants to start? Pauline, let's go.
Data collection. Without data, you cannot do anything. And my experience in the Netherlands with as you can understand, in oncology, there is a lot of very expensive drugs coming to the market. Some of them are really at the start, it's already clear they have added value, but a number of them, it's not so clear at the start. So we need to have the real world data. And my experience is that this is still very difficult to collect, because the data are in the hospital files, but they are not easily to extract from there. Yes. And I think HTAi cannot do any evaluation if they don't have data.
HTAi is the clue for everything, of course.
I think we just need to do it.
I think there needs to be some company and an HTAi body that has the guts to just start early and do this iterative assessment and just see what happens and see what the challenges are and learn along the way. But we just have to go and do this.
We had also this, what Pauline already said, might be also the price. So I would like to ask Marcus about this. Is the price something which we can do to improve HTAi and to improve Lifecycle? This is also here the question, why does a pacemaker still cost thousands of euros? Shouldn't they be a few hundred by now? Technology gets better, but why not cheaper, faster? So, and also Pauline says, money is a big, big challenge. What do you think?
Good question, Sean. You can't have it all, right? So, no, but I think actually the point I was going to make goes exactly in that direction. Because when you think back to the first pacemaker patient I was telling you about, I think he lived more than 40 years and he was pacemaker dependent. So he lived more than 40 years with a pacemaker, died of very old age, not of a heart disease, by the way. But I think on his journey, he had, I think, 23 or 26 pacemakers that were implanted into his body. So if that same individual were to get a pacemaker today, he or she would do it with 4 probably, right, over the same lifetime. So I think if you look at the relative cost effectiveness of pacing technology, it has increased tremendously. Even if prices were stable over time and maybe not dropping down to that level that you might imagine. And clearly, I mean, there is obviously a lot of movement. I mean, this is a competitive market, so prices, I mean, are on the move. But I think my point is that, industry is adding so much innovation into an established technology that actually there is a lot of freebie for those who pay. So you get much more, for the same, level of investment that you got, years and certainly decades ago. So I think actually that equation looks pretty okay for society.
Yeah, but are you thinking about that?
Well,
are hospital-based HTAi units then something you would need?
What was your last line? No, well, I can respond to what I heard. First of all, about the real-world data, I think this is very popular. But if real-world data would have been used for the introduction of renal denervation, then it would certainly have been adopted, because the real-world data were so extremely biased in the early years that they would have shown very beneficial effects without. Whereas there is a lot of other explanations why they worked. So one of the things that came out was that patients were taking their pills better after a procedure for the first half year or 1 year. But we need data that are beyond that, and we also need, of course, the good trials first to prove that it's really effective. The other thing but that's an ethical discussion about if pricing of products. I have no clue as a clinician what prices of interventions are based on, but sometimes it is claimed that it is what it would save society to introduce a technology like that, and that would be for the company. But in that case, the netto gain for the society would be nil, and everything would go to a company. If it's an innovation that would save it would improve the lives of the population, and it would also save money, that's really a worthwhile. And this is something that it's completely intransparent as far as I know. I don't know how these prices come about. But that's an ethical, political discussion, perhaps, that we cannot solve in a hospital, I think.
Yeah, maybe I can quickly respond to that, and I'm not going to go into discussion about what makes prices, but I think the notion of does innovation need to be cost saving by definition. I don't think it's the right question to ask. I think obviously we all would like that, right? And there are examples where you can show proudly that you're not only adding value in terms of better outcomes, better qualities, but you're actually saving costs. But I think we probably need to accept that this is more of an exception than it is the rule, right? And this is why I think many societies have established, acceptability thresholds and say, what is progress? What is an added, quality-adjusted life here? What is it worth to us, right? And I think there are only a few things in life that really come, for free. And I think it's an investment decision, obviously, and we are trading, things off against each other, and we're obviously, we would like to have, the best, value for the additional investment that we make. And I think that's fair, that makes sense, and that requires, a nimble and an up-to-date and flexible HTAi system. But if every innovation that we get, comes at cost saving, I mean, this audience would be empty. No one would need to do HTAi anymore. It would, we would be living in a perfect world.
I can see that problem, yes. But this is perhaps what Janneke is saying, that at what stage is an independent HTAi expert involved in these things? I have no idea of, but that's a very important thing, and this is also has this ethical dimension, I think, which goes beyond the investment return and things like that.
I don't want to occupy the entire meeting, but actually I want to respond to that as well, because that's an interesting one, because I would actually turn this around. I think, I'm not going to say HTAi is too independent, but what I'm trying to say is it's too much of a black box for us, for instance, as industry. And I do understand that to a degree, because obviously, what HTAi wants to do is, the idea is, to have independent science that then actually acts as an advisor to, decision-making in healthcare. But if that independence turns into, kind of an impenetrable black box that doesn't talk to anybody anymore, and sometimes I see, at least, at institutions like NICE, there are, a couple of, pre-scheduled, moments of interaction. But I wonder whether this is not also something where HTAi needs to come out in the field and actually see how things work, both in practice but also with industry. I mean, you mentioned it, Janneke. It needs to be transparent, needs to be iterative. And I know it's a thin edge, because you obviously don't want to, you want to have your rules, you want to have your system, your procedures, your independence, your transparency, your credibility. But on the other hand, if you are kind of encapsulating yourself into a vacuum, you're not gonna do. I mean, it's gonna be not realistic any longer, right? And I think that's also something that needs to be bridged.
It's very, very interesting. The first time in my over 20 years HTAi that said that I'm working in a black box. I'm a black box. That's very good. So well, but this is quite interesting. But Pauline wanted to say something with that.
Yeah, I have been involved in a lot of discussions with our ZIN Institute, which was already mentioned earlier today, which is the HTAi agency in the Netherlands. Mostly the discussions are on specific products, and they're exactly what you are saying, Marcus. It's on certain time points, there is just a possibility to react, mostly only in writing, which is not really helping the discussion. Then, at my own organization, we have a working group with patients. There are 15 patients in there, all cancer patients, and we invited people from ZIN for an open discussion. And where normally these patients are, although they are already involved in the whole area for quite a time, so they do understand the mechanisms and the procedures and the rules, etc., and the necessity for HTAi judgment. Sometimes in the procedures they are like, well, what the hell are they doing? Why are they doing this? And when we were just discussing in an open discussion not particular products, but in general, there was much more understanding. And within half an hour, we started to really look for solutions together instead of being opposite to each other. And I think that is also something I don't know about experiences in other jurisdictions apart from the Netherlands with HTAi, but I think there should be much more open dialogue instead of and if we really would go into this life cycle management and stewardship or coaching or whatever you want to name it, then you should be much more open than these institutes might be now.
I would love to have this discussion further. What does this kind of openness means, and how we could deal with independency then? What is the crucial thing of HTAi?
That's a problem.
Yeah, and where and how you need this kind of dialogue. But as we we do not have solutions here. So we start the conference, and I hope we start the discussion. This is quite a big thing, but we'll talk about it later, Marcus. You will see. I have some question here to Izuna. Do the regulators, we talked about regulate the gap between regulators and HTAi, and they said, do the regulators give your HTAi unit full access to the safety data they gather? That's very important, watch at EMA. And do they have an active or passive surveillance system? Anything you can say on your interaction with regulators and the life cycle around?
Yeah, in terms of regulators, how we work, HTAi agencies usually work together in Malaysia. We do work together with the regulators. For example, for Horizon Scanning Committee, Technical Advisory Committee, the regulators will sit in our committee members as well. So all the reports in terms of the horizon scanning will be shared. We'll share with the regulators so that it can be an input for their decisions in terms of registering the drugs of the medical devices. So there's opportunity to work together, and we hope that we can collaborate further better in the future as well.
So there we have an example of dialogue. That's good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Nobody want to act on that, but we have a new question here. The risk of a life cycle approach is more uncertainty on the access to innovations, sensible access to innovations, which can be frustrating to patient, clinicians, and industry. How should we address that uncertainty? This is an interesting question. Janneke.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, please.
I don't think I agree. I don't know if I didn't read the question, so I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, but I think it reduces the uncertainty, because if you do not work in silos and in black boxes, but you talk to each other from the start, then you know what you need from each other. And for Marcus, it's much more certain what a Zin, for example, would need from him and from the innovation. And also for a HTAi body. And I think there is more certainty about, well, in an early phase, there's uncertainty about the innovation, but there's certainty about what is expected and what kind of research you want to do. And there are also some questions about costs. And I think it's an interesting debate on who's going to pay for this and whose responsibility is that. But I'm not sure that it will be more costly and more labor intensive, because I think if you do it from the start, then you can do it much more efficiently. You need to re-engineer the process, and that can be a much more efficient process if you talk to each other from an early start.
Yeah, just wanted two things. One, on this question, I mean, I do understand where I think Matthias put the question in here, where his fear is coming from. I mean, there is a risk, of course, if, if at a certain point in time you need to take a decision, right? And I think what you are fearing is that either this decision is being not taken or is constantly at risk of being revoked, because you're obviously, you're re-looking and you're reanalyzing and reassessing. So I think there needs to be obviously a certainty, and I think that's what Matthias is afraid of, that, how certain can we be that, something which is there isn't then taken away from us again because, you are assessing it again, or will we maybe even push out the decision because, it's life cycle anyway, so we can maybe do it a little later or whatever. So I do understand that if there is if this kind of more continuous move to assess things, how robust and how sustainable will your decision ultimately be? And I think that is an important point about which has to do with how is the information that an HTAi, and certainly a life cycle HTAi, how will this ultimately be used for decision making in healthcare, right? Because this community is, if I may say so, a support community, right? Providing data, insights, input into ultimately ministers of health and payers and others. So they would then also have that mindset of, okay, am I ready for a life cycle of information and decision support coming in my direction as well, right? So I not certainly have a solution to that, but I do understand the question. And then there was another one, now that I already have the mic. Kathleen was asking, Marcus, there is methodologies and there is guidelines, why you're talking of black box, and I should probably just clarify that. I am aware of those, and I think that's really the strength of HTAi, is that it is a well-documented, robust, super established methodology that gives it its credibility and its strength. Maybe black box isn't the right word. Maybe it's more a fortress. So I think what I'm after is more accessibility, is more dialogue, is more exchange, because there are so many facets, there are so many elements to what technology does to a patient, but also to a healthcare provider. And usually they are not all captured in randomized controlled trials. And I do understand they form the basis of decision making, but there are many other aspects there as well that we need to make sure that they are captured in what HTAi provides to decision making.
I would like to respond a bit regarding the HTAi life cycle. There's a question as well in terms of the resources used to conduct HTAi life cycle. In the definition itself, the assessment can be done at any point in its life cycle. It's not that it is being done at every point in its life cycle. So it depends. Not all the technologies will be assessed at the different points. It depends when the technology is being introduced or identified. So in terms of resources, when you identify early, it's easier to plan, and usually it's more for expensive technologies or technologies with high impact. Not all technologies that you will assess or identify very early in its development, only the high-value technologies. Okay, so that is in terms of resources, and it depends when it is. The other question that I noted just now, maybe I did not answer clearly, in terms of the regulators, whether they provide us with full access of the safety data. Yes, when we request, we will be provided with the access of the safety data, and they do have this passive surveillance system. In terms of the value of clinical evidence for orphan drugs, orphan drugs, we have separate fundings for orphan drugs, actually. So patients are being assessed in terms of case-to-case basis, and we are going to have a trust fund. And recently, we have a workshop to develop MCDA, a multi-criteria decision analysis, to decide on the trust fund allocation. So it involves patient groups, many patient groups, regulators, industries, clinicians, and also from other authority that can fund the treatment, can help to fund the treatment as well, which includes religious group as well. So it was a very good discussion. Patients take part in terms of developing the criteria as well as to weight the criteria itself. So the participation is very, very good in terms, and patients and clinicians actually works very closely in terms of to ensure that there's a transparent, systematic process in terms of the resource allocation. Yeah, I think that's all from me.
Thank you. So we are almost at the end of the time of the debate here. Unfortunately, because we have a lot of very nice questions here, but I'm looking forward. Those who present these questions, please take chance of grab one of the panelists later on and talk to them and start into the conference with these kind of points. There's a question about values. What shall we do with the values? They're changing over the life cycle and all this stuff. And this is really worthwhile to discuss. So they are good questions. But I would like, before coming to the end, I will give a last question to the plenary. By this, there is the poll. Please check. The poll will be displayed in your event. And check this question. I think you will know this question, and I would be interested whether there is a change after we had this kind of discussion now. And during you filling up the poll, I would like to ask the panelists the last question. Could you just give, in short, each of you, 3 important points the audience should have in mind when now going out and working and discussing on life cycle approach during this conference? Let's start with Marcus. Poor guy, with the area first.
3.
3.
I think I give you 1.
Then it must be a big one.
Yes. Trust. I think it all boils down to trust, and I know that we have these barriers everywhere in life, but certainly in healthcare as well, and this barrier is formed of distrust, right? And I think if HTAi and this community can go out and go forward and play a role in helping us to establish trust between the different players in healthcare, and that definitely also includes industry, but includes the patient community, includes the providers, and obviously also those who pay. I think that would be really a way or a step forward in the right direction. I think we need to collectively work in improving and constantly improving trust in each other and in what we do.
Thank you. Janneke. 1 big or 3?
Won't surprise you that I'll start with start early, from early phase, do it together, and be transparent. And I think that all those 3 words come down to trust as well. But yeah, and just do it. Just go and do it.
Let's go. Okay, yeah. Pauline.
Yes, for me, I think this whole conference will be also a big learning experience. So for me, education would be a nice word. I think there are still a lot of patient organizations who have not too much knowledge about HTAi. And looking at Jaap, I think the same might be true for physicians. And they need to deliver the data because they are treating the patients.
Thank you. Izuna.
Yeah, to me, life cycle approach in HTAi is feasible. It needs collaborations, and it may lead to better resource allocation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, the first is please help the clinicians because they are ignorant.
Poor clinicians.
And be absolutely transparent, and that's also to the industry. And the third thing is, I agree, the training of physicians should include much more on HTAi because this is not part of our curriculum.
Thank you so much. I hope you have now some ideas which you can work on, and I'm looking at these at the poll, and I find it quite interesting. Collaboration remains, but now there is something new. It's trust, and it is almost as big as collaboration. The word evidence is almost gone. Data remained. So this is quite interesting. So the combination of collaboration and trust wins against evidence. Very good, very good. I like that very much. Good. Now, what are we going to do? You have this nice picture from the plenary. You will get it. You can have it online and all this stuff. You will see the development, and you can take it with you. That you have what happened here always in front, so that you can deal with it during the conference. We tried to give you a kind of an introduction what is the conference about, and then the next step is now going out and have the discussion and get the information, and also to be connected with the other plenaries. The next one is the public confidence in healthcare decision making. There you see that really comes after all this kind of discussion, you see where's the trust here. Yeah? And the last one, running around in circles, time for real collaboration between regulators, HTAi bodies, and the important clinicians. So we will see. I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm very much looking forward to a great conference today. Thank you for listening to us, and please join me in giving a warm applause to our plenarists.